Thank you for tuning in to the newest episode of the Plain Bible Teaching Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Soker. This episode is being released on January 5th, 2022. And joining me again this week is Christopher Gardana, a good friend of mine who preaches out in West Texas. Christopher, welcome back to the show.
Happy New Year.
Yes, Happy New Year. This is the first episode of 2023. And with the start of the new year, we tend to look ahead over the next 12 months to see what we can improve, how we might change, what goals we want to hit, and all of that sort of thing. And in the episode that was released last week, I talked about some of those or some potential areas of focus that I've been working on and as suggestions of what you may want to consider as well. But in this episode, what we're going to talk about is not so much from the positive ideas like we talked about, like the last episode was. We think about goals and resolutions. We think about possibilities and opportunities for all those things that are potentially good and how we can improve. But today, what we're talking about are some challenges that we could be facing as Christians and as local churches in the new year and the situation that we're in right now. And the more we are aware of these potential challenges, the better we'll be able to prepare for them and be able to face them in a way that would be pleasing to God and fulfilling the work that He wants us to do. So some or all of these things we're talking about today may apply to you and your congregation. And if so, I hope that at the end of the discussion, you'll be better prepared to face whatever this new year holds. So for some related materials to what we're going to discuss here today, you can check out the show notes for this episode at plainbibleteaching.com/podcast/010523. So now for our discussion this week. We're going to be talking about challenges that are facing the church in the new year. And both of us had come up with a couple of ideas as far as what we see and what we're going to talk about. And the first one that I thought of was, as far as a challenge that we face in the world around us, is that we are living in a hyper polarized and politicized world. And it's gotten to the point that many people in the world cannot see past that. And anyone who doesn't line up with their side is the enemy. And everything has been made into a political issue. One example of this is the reason why this came to mind. And Christopher, I don't know if you noticed this or not, but a few weeks ago I posted what I thought was just something funny on Facebook. It was a screenshot of a tweet that I saw on Twitter where someone was talking about, you go to a restaurant and you place an order and you have the option to, tip this percent or this percent or this percent. They were presenting the scenario that, well, here in 2024, that you have the option of tipping 75% or 95% or 125%, and you click the 75% and feel bad about yourself because you clicked the lowest option. I posted that, and what was funny was that someone commented on that post asking if that was an anti-worker or an anti-capitalism post. And I responded, I said that, well, it's neither. I just thought it was funny. But you
Wow.
have everyone makes things into something that's political, and even things that, we think are jokes that I didn't think that someone would take that sort of
Sure.
angle on it. But
They're seeing everything through that lens.
right, everything is through the lens of politics and whether it lines up with your ideology or not. And if it doesn't, then you see it as an attack on what you believe and the people that you agree with.
Sure.
Now, when we think about Christians and our local churches that are in this world that, we have this type of thing going on around us, it presents a challenge to us because if we're not careful, we could end up unnecessarily alienating the people that we are trying to reach with the gospel. And this reminded me of the passage over in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, beginning in verse 19, where Paul said, "For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a slave to all so that I may win more. To the Jews I became as a Jew so that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, though not being myself under the law, so that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, though not being without the law of God, but under the law of Christ, so that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that I myself might save some.
Hmm.
Paul was making the point that he was going to do whatever he could to reach everyone around him, regardless of whether they were Jews, they were Gentiles. He was going to do what he could to reach people around him. Now, for us and for Paul as well, does not mean we compromise our convictions. We need to stand for the truth on things like abortion and racism and transgenderism, even though those have been made into political issues. We need to stand for the truth and stand for what the Bible teaches on those things, because they're moral issues, not political issues. Because we are ultimately trying to reach people with the gospel. We're going to make stands for what the truth is. But if we're not careful, we could get swept up in this and turn everything into a political issue. And we could end up unnecessarily alienating others. We can have our political opinions or opinions on political matters, but we need to be careful that those opinions don't trump the gospel when we're trying to reach people with the truth. So that was one challenge that I saw as far as the context that we're living in now with the world that we're interacting with.
Sure. I remember a few years ago preaching a lesson on morality, and I alluded to the fact that at the time, and this is, a couple empty suits ago. And again, that was a political. I just politicized that too, didn't I? That might have offended somebody if I said empty suits, but I was talking about presidents that fill the office and pontificate and everything else, and I don't care whether they have an whether they're a donkey or an elephant or some other variation. They're all, anyway. You see, my politics is coming out right now. But I was actually preaching a lesson just on morality and how we had someone in office who at one point was espousing the traditional view of marriage, and then as soon as they got into office, they had an enlightenment, and now they believe that those those other folks that were championing the cause of marriage for all, now he was enlightened, and I never actually said any name in the pulpit. That wasn't really my point. And I got lambasted after worship by a member who said if I ever spoke about, and he named the president by name, which I had never said, that he would never be there again. And I said, look, I'm not preaching politics. I said, but I can't allude to those who are promoting immorality, and I can point it out for what it is and show you what the Bible says about it. And certainly I need to be preaching the whole counsel of God, and every sermon shouldn't be, hey, guess what the guy in the White House said. I'm not, that's not my goal. But whenever it does touch on those things and it is a Bible subject, I certainly have a right and a responsibility to preach on it. And you may get offended, but you need to consider again this hyper politicization, whether you're letting the Bible define your opinions or whether you are allowing, well, my family's always voted fill in the blank, 3 or 4 generations, yellow dogs, red dogs, all kinds of dogs, and, well, are you allowing that to color your thinking, or are you allowing God's word to permeate you to the point where maybe you're disgusted by all of them?
That's very possible, and I think
Mhm.
there are a lot more people who are getting that way too.
Sure.
But yeah, you're right that there are these issues that the Bible absolutely talks about and addresses, that we need to address those. And it doesn't matter, which political party is pushing, one thing or another, or not standing up
Uniparty.
for something.
It's
It
the
doesn't matter what the
uniparty.
party is.
Yeah.
And but there's a danger that if we do make everything about the party or whatever it is, that people just tune us out and think
Sure.
that, well, we're just on the other side, and we don't want to be on one side or the other. We want to be on the Lord's side.
Amen. Amen.
And that's what we need to be careful of. Now,
Yeah. One other
yeah, go
thing
ahead.
about that too is one of the angles you were pointing out very clearly is my goal is not to arbitrarily, prematurely offend someone. My goal isn't to offend anyone, but but it doesn't matter what you say, someone's going to get offended. But I shouldn't be setting out to be abrasive, to basically they're going to shut their ears before they ever get to hear anything intelligent, hopefully coming out of my mouth, because maybe I've posted a meme, or that's the day. I remember when it used to be comics in the newspaper, now it's memes. Everybody sends a
Right.
meme. I'm guilty, very guilty. And but to the wrong person, you may completely turn them off, where they're never going to listen to you again because you have stepped on their pet idea or whatever.
Right.
And our goal is to reach them. And I appreciate the verse there, that I became weak, that I might win the weak. I become all things to all people, that I might save some. So our goal is to look for a way, in a gentle way, to be a good example, be a light, a shining light, and a beacon for truth, and not color their thinking prematurely by us saying something off color, or you maybe just callous.
Right. Yeah, something that could be taken the wrong way, that it would unnecessarily alienate someone, because it doesn't matter how someone votes. Someone could vote for one party, the other party. They both need the gospel.
Sure.
And so we don't want to stand in the way of that, because we're pushing, politics in a, way that's not helpful,
And that would
more
include
than we're
social
pushing the
media.
gospel.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So why don't you go ahead with the first point that you had?
Oh, let me pull it up here. So I guess this kind of segues with that idea, the hyper politicization. Let me try again. The hyper politicization of the church, and seeing this hyper polarized there. That was easier to say, hyper polarized. I should have said that. I think sometimes we fail to recognize that we should be setting a good example, not only for those in our congregation, but to those in the world. And this includes our social media. And a couple of years ago, somebody coined the phrase "Let's go, Brandon," and you had a lot of people who wouldn't say the other phrase, which is what it really meant, which we won't say because anyone who has been paying attention knows. But they did feel comfortable saying, let's say, "Let's go, Brandon," or any variation of that. And I thought even that was not appropriate, because again, what are you really saying? You're saying, well, I'm going to say the other version that doesn't use profanity, but I'm still going to get the point across.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, we should be trying to set a good example in the world. And Peter said it this way in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 12. This is the ESV. Says, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. I remember in grade school, of course, you in public school, you're around all kinds of kids, and they all have different colorful language. And I never used profanity, and I'm not bragging. I'm sure I did make mistakes here and there every now and then, but I do remember one time in 8th grade, I don't know what came over me, but I just thought I don't even remember what word I used. It wasn't one of the bad ones. No, they're all bad. But long story short, I used some profanity, some curse word, and all my friends, they looked over at me and they said, "Christopher, you don't use bad language." Oh man, you should believe the shame I felt inside, because here I had been an example, whether I realized it or not. And then when they saw that one thing, boy, they could have used it all day long and no one would have batted an eye. But as soon as I did, man, they cranked their neck around and looked at me and said, "Christopher." And I thought, oops.
Yeah, people notice whether we realize it or not.
They
People are
do.
watching.
And so we need to keep our behavior excellent, because they're watching. They might not say anything, but all it's going to take is one moment of emotion, one and there's a lot of this hyper polarizing politics going on that really gets people heated up. I remember other stories where I brought up one little thing, and I realized very quickly I should have kept my opinion to myself, because they went off. They just got really mad, and I thought, wow, the emotions are right there on the surface. And again, trying to set an example, and this includes our social media, and on Facebook, Twitter, whatever your platforms you're using. Are you thinking before you post or repost or any of those kinds of things, or did it just seem like the right thing at that moment, and you click and it's there? And now what have you done? Now you're basically espousing those things. I remember when MySpace first came to be a thing, and then Facebook, and people were, and they still do it, I guess. They will go to a page for a show or a program or a TV series, and they'll click like, and so they have all these little badges on their homepage. And I remember Christians that I thought I knew really well, that were basically clicking like to some really degenerate stuff, and they were putting it on their Facebook pages. This is, basically, my vote of approval. I love this series. I love this program. I love this TV personality in Hollywood who promotes all kinds of wickedness. And and I thought, wow, what are we showing the world by our example? What are we promoting?
Right. The one thing I thought of when we think about social media is that I think there's a temptation for Christians to get a little bit lax in how they use it. Like you were saying, like not being careful what they say or what they post or what they like and things like that. And I think there's a temptation to think that, well, it's just social media. It's not real life. You are interacting with real people. So, I mean, there
Sure.
is a difference between social media and in-person interactions. There's definitely a
Absolutely.
difference between those two things. And but you are interacting with real people. So whatever we're doing, if we wouldn't say those things or promote those things or whatever it might be in, a face-to-face interaction, then that's not something that's appropriate there either. So we
Right.
need to, whatever rules apply to communication and to, as you were saying, our example, those are going
Sure.
to apply to social media just as much as they would any other time.
Modesty is another one of those.
Hmm.
Would
Yeah,
you wear that bathing suit in front of your brethren, but then you'll post it online?
right.
Just a thought.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely another thing to think about as well. Whatever we're as pictures or or language or whatever it might be, we are sending a message with what we post, and we need to be careful with what we're presenting and what we're portraying in that.
Hmm.
The next point that I thought of as far as challenges that we're facing, this kind of gets more into the local congregation in that context. But one of the things that I've noticed is this idea of thinking that our obligation to one another, to our brethren in the local church, is confined to the church building. Now, here's what I mean by this, because I want to make sure I explain this properly, that this is about Christians thinking that if they see their brethren during their regular assemblies, but that's the only time they see them, then that's all that they need from their brethren, and that's all that their brethren need from them. Now, a couple of caveats I want to make here as I'm, explaining this. I'm not trying to minimize the importance of the assembly. The assembly is critical, that we have to gather together and assemble for worship and other things like that we get together for. And I also recognize that there are some who deal with health issues or problems with age and things like that,
Sure.
who are just doing everything they can just to assemble. And so I don't want to come across as if I'm criticizing people in those positions. But my point is that our relationship with our brethren needs to be more than just seeing them in the church building whenever the doors are open, because
Sure.
it's very easy for this to become the extent to, that's all our interactions that we have with our brethren. And this could be due to, we just are busy and we have all these things going on. It could be in maybe for some lingering effects of the pandemic or other things that are happening like that. But we're told there's an emphasis in the scriptures in the New Testament about the need for us to receive encouragement and give encouragement to our brethren. Hebrews chapter 3 verses 12 and 13 says, "Take care, brethren, that there not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God, but encourage one another day after day, as long as it is still called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin." That's talking about regular, consistent interactions with our brethren. You mentioned in the last point social media. That could be a way that we can interact with one another, but again, that doesn't replace
Sure.
in-person interactions and meeting with people. The early church, we see that the brethren were meeting together, Acts 2:46, meeting together from house to house. So
Sure.
with the challenges that we are facing today and the temptation for not just for religious groups, but everything to just be moved online, and that's the extent of
Isolated.
our
Yeah.
right. We're
Mm.
isolated from others, but we feel like, or we try to act like we're not, because we're still friends on Facebook or whatever it
Sure.
might be. We need encouragement from our brethren. We get this in the assembly, and so the assembly is still just as important as it's always been. But if that's the only place that we're getting it, then we may need something more than just that. We need to be with one another, especially in the context of the local church. We need to be with our brethren and receiving encouragement from them more often than just that.
Sure. And it doesn't say be right there in their house every single day, but it says exhort one another every day. So, I think you're onto something there about some of the problems we're having in the church, and something I've seen, in different congregations where there are those, they're nice, they're friendly, they're cordial, but they keep you at arm's length. And they feel like their obligation is to see you on Sunday, and otherwise stay at arm's length. And I remember a brother telling me how many times he'd try to go visit a certain family, and if someone comes over to my house, especially if I know them, I'm going to invite them in. The house might not be clean, but it is what it is, right? But he was expressing how this one family, every time he came by, they would come outside and kind of pull the door behind them, and they'd stand there in the front and kind of find out what they were there for, kind of in an inquisitorial, oh, why are you here? Real friendly, but they never ever, in the I don't know how many years it was, they never got invited in. And there could have been some benign reason, I don't know, but it was just that there was this distance that was artificially there, that was never going to not be there.
Right.
And so there was never going to be the encouragement that either one of them could have had from having a better relationship. And so I think this is a really good one to consider, that we do need to consider each other more than just on Sunday. Oh, why isn't so and so in their pew? Why isn't the song leader here today? Or, I think there's some that can fall through the cracks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the case. And if if we are if the interactions we have with our brethren are only there in the church building, we sometimes think about uh, exercising church discipline and withdrawing from someone.
Sure.
But if that's the only time that we ever see them and they kind of drift off, and
Well, and
all there
maybe
ever
the
was.
the only time we've ever gone by their house is to deliver them some letter from the congregation that
Right.
they're being
Yeah.
withdrawn from. And they're like, well, you've never bothered to come to my house in
Mm.
20 years or 50, whatever length of time it
Right.
is. And you only decided now to find out where I live, to tell me that you're, quote, withdrawing from me.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
another subject we can get into. Sorry.
Yeah, that's another way that this is manifests itself. But you know,
Mhm.
th- that would be a lot more effective. And yeah, we could go down a whole nother trail with this, but that would be a lot more effective if you had these relationships where they saw that they're actually losing something. It's not just because they're still welcome in the church building. If
Sure. Oh,
someone is
yeah.
is a wayward brother, we want them in the assembly. So we're not withdrawing from them. It's not kicking them out of from, or barring them from the door.
Our
We want
goal
them
is
there.
to want them to come back and want to be active.
Right.
Yeah.
But if they don't have that relationship with their brethren, then it's difficult to try to win them back with those efforts.
Well, and it's harder to tell if when they're starting to drift off too, if we're only ever seeing them maybe on Sunday or whatever,
Hmm.
and so we don't know what's going on in their life. They don't know what's going on in our life.
Right.
But again, it takes two. That's the other part. So sometimes we beat ourselves up, and I'm not saying we shouldn't try harder, because we do need to. So certainly this year, I believe we should really look at it and see what we can do and examine ourselves. But at the end of the day, it does require both parties wanting to be involved. And there's some people that you're just not gonna. They're an island.
Right. Yeah, that's true. It takes effort from both sides, but
Mhm.
I think as we look at ourselves, we need to try to make the effort and do what we can.
I just want to be able to answer to God and Him say, "Well, I know that you tried."
Right. Yeah. What's the go ahead and take us in the last point, and as we
So
wrap
yeah,
this up.
this kind of goes and kind of jumps off of that one. You mentioned something about how we need to consider that our obligations to one another in the local church is confined to just the church building. Well, I think a lot of people think that's where the Bible study is confined to also, and they are content to hear a sermon on Sunday. Maybe they are there for both services and a Wednesday night Bible study or something like that, and they think that that's good. We're evangelizing. Well, I think we need to consider that in 2023, those who are lost, and that went with my first point about being a good example, and therefore, hopefully, we can recognize there's more to it than just going to church on Sunday and midweek Bible study, but we need to be looking for opportunities to have Bible studies and uh, reaching the lost, not just building up those who are already striving to serve the Lord.
Mhm. Yeah, that's definitely an important point, that we can, going to the last point, we can, we want to emphasize what we're doing together and encouraging one another and all of that. And as we come together in the local church and those assemblies and Bible studies, those are important. But as far as how we're going to reach others, we do need to make an effort to do that. And it's not just going to happen by accident. So yeah, this, when we think about, how we can do that, we can come up with all sorts of programs and all sorts of plans, or we're going to have a gospel meeting or all sorts of different things, but ultimately it comes down to each one of us. In 1 Peter 3:15 tells us that you be ready to give an answer.
Mhm.
That's for all of us. It
And it's
doesn't
to
matter if we're
and it says it's to those who ask. So
right.
not everyone's going to be a candidate for teaching at that moment. They may be hard hearted. They might have lots of other ideas. There's a gentleman I work with, and he's got some really interesting ideas. They have absolutely nothing to do with Bible, but he's got some real, So I, at this point, when I try to talk to him, because he's brought up stuff, he says, "Oh, I've already transcended the Bible." He's on another plane. Another whole set of knowledge or something. I don't know, but so he's not really a good candidate for having a Bible study because he's already rejected it. But to those who have a question, we should be ready with an answer. You're absolutely right.
Right. Yeah, that's something for each of us. And, whether it's answering those questions or trying to generate conversations that could lead to those, because we don't always know who's going to be receptive at first.
Sure.
It's, the parable of the sower. He just sowed the seed on
Mhm.
wherever it would land. And some soil was receptive and some wasn't. And just like some hearts are going to be accepting of it or open to it at least.
Mhm.
And then some aren't. We won't know until we actually try to share those things.
One other thing too is I saw a meme the other day, and it looked like it was Jesus with a bunch of his disciples, and he says, "Help your neighbor and take care of the poor and the hungry." And then someone says, "You mean give the money to the Romans and let them do it, right?" And he says, "Okay, I'm going to start over. Let me know where I lost you." And he's going to say it again, and, because he's saying you need to do this, right? And it was interesting joke, but I think there are a lot of Christians that also have this notion that, well, the elders or the deacons or the preacher or that guy that does a really good job on the Wednesday night Bible study, they're out there, and I put my money in the plate, and I'm supporting preachers in Puerto Rico, wherever I'm going, and so I've done my part. And I would encourage us to endeavor to each of us be ready to give an answer and look for opportunities. One lady that I love dearly that's passed, she was in her 90s, down in South Florida. She didn't get to interact with very many people because she was shut in, but she had someone that would take her to the pharmacy, and the lady that was behind the counter, the pharmacist, was filling her prescription every week, and she interacted with her. And at some point, she had convinced that young lady that was a pharmacist to not only come and pick her up and take her to Bible study, but she bought her a Bible and put her name on it. And she was having Bible studies with this young woman that was probably only in her early 20s, and here's this woman in her 90s, and has perfectly good reason to not have the time or the energy or the health to have a Bible study. And she was focused on those that she interacted with. And that's always stood out to me. Like, if she didn't have an excuse, what excuse do I have? How many people do I interact with, on a daily basis or on a weekly basis? And I've never to my condemnation, thought, I need to ask them. I need to talk to them. I need to approach them because they see me every week and I see them every week. And maybe in 2023, that's what we need to do.
Yeah, that example there is definitely one that to challenge us and kind of motivate us to make sure that we're doing what we can do. That's for each one of us. You know, whoever we are in the Lord's church, we have that responsibility, and we can all do that in some way.
Right. And the thing is the people that she interacted with, I'd never met that woman. I don't
Right.
get prescriptions. I don't need medication. She was the only one in the Lord's church in that place that had contact with her, and she was making use of it. The preacher, he's only going to interact with so many people, the elders, whoever. You, me, we interact with different folks. Those are unique opportunities for you if you're ready and you're willing.
Right. Excellent points. Appreciate that. So these are some challenges that the two of us have, as we've kind of brainstormed this, we've see these as challenges that are affecting the Lord's church in the new year. Not that necessarily these are anything new, but both of us, we kind of think that these are some things we need to be aware of, and we wanted to discuss those and share those with all of you here today. And maybe you're listening to this and you think of something else that we didn't talk about that you see as a challenge or some issue that we're going to be facing this year. Let me know what that is. You can send me an email to andy@plainbibleteaching.com, and maybe that would be something that we cover in a future episode.
Yeah, this was not an exhaustive list.
Right, definitely not. Christopher, do you have anything you wanted to add before we close today?
No, no more interruptions. No, I
Okay.
appreciate it. And Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah, Happy New Year. And appreciate everyone listening. But that's all for this week. Thank you for listening to the Plain Bible Teaching Podcast. I hope you found this to be interesting, informative, and helpful. For links to some related materials that I'll include in the show notes, you can find those at plainbibleteaching.com/podcast/010523. If you have a moment to rate and review the podcast or share it with others that you think would benefit from it, that's always appreciated. And if you're listening to this, remember that we are also uploading video versions to the Plain Bible Teaching YouTube channel. So if you prefer the video to the audio, then that's available to you. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe to the channel so you can see other videos as they are released as well. And if you see a news story or have some topic that you think would make for a good discussion, again, you can email that to me at andy@plainbibleteaching.com. Thanks again for listening, and I hope to talk to you again next week.